Sierra 1, confirm visual on the package. We are exposed down here.
Negative, Bravo. ROE is strict. Do not engage.
Sierra 1.
Understand they're flanking us.
Sierra 1, confirm visual on the package. We are exposed down here. The voice in Madison's earpiece crackled, distorted by the magnetic interference of the storm. Through the scope of her Mk-22 ASR, the world was a wash of green phosphor and biting snow. Her heart rate was 42 beats per minute. Solid copy, Bravo lead. I see the technicals. They're setting up a kill box at your 12. We can't see them. Requesting permission to engage. Negative, Bravo, Command interjected, the voice distant and sterile. ROE is strict. Do not engage until they fire first. We need political deniability. Madison's finger hovered over the trigger. She saw the RPG gunner on the ridge, aiming directly at the exposed team below. If she waited for them to fire first, her team would be dead. If she fired now, she'd be court-martialed for breaking the rules of engagement in a sovereign nation. Sierra 1, they're flanking us. The panic in the Bravo lead's voice was rising. Madison closed her eyes for a microsecond. The cold steel of the trigger felt like a judgment. Command, Sierra 1, signal is breaking up. I repeat, signal is crack. The recoil slammed into her shoulder before she even finished the lie. 48 hours earlier, Hindu Kush border region. The wind in the Pamir Mountains didn't just blow, it hunted. It sought out the smallest gap in the Gore-Tex, the tiniest seam in the glove, trying to turn blood into ice. Petty Officer First Class Madison Sierra Davis lay prone on a ridge of jagged shale, 11,000 feet above sea level. Her world was reduced to the view through the Night Force Adhikar scope mounted on her Mk-22 advanced sniper rifle. Temp is dropping. Negative 22 Celsius, a voice whispered. It was Liltian Evans, her spotter, huddled in the hide a few feet to her left. He was checking the Kestrel weather meter, his movements stiff. Copy, Madison replied. Her voice was flat, stripped of inflection. Windage? Full value, left to right, gusting 15 to 20 knots. It's a nightmare out here, Davis. Madison didn't respond. She adjusted her turret, the tactile click, 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 the only sound competing with the howling gale. She was used to nightmares, the real ones, and the ones created by the men she now served with. You don't have the lung capacity for this altitude, recruit. The memory of Chief Holloway's voice surfaced unbidden. Your bone density can't handle the load. Ring the bell. Go be a desk jockey. She tightened her grip on the pistol grip of the rifle. She wasn't a recruit anymore. She was the tip of the spear for Operation Obsidian Glass. Bravo team is 10 mics out, Evans whispered, checking the encrypted tablet. We need to clear the approach. Madison shifted her eye to the thermal setting. The valley floor below was a wash of cold blues and grays. The target was a cluster of stone structures, an old Soviet listening post, repurposed by warlords. To the untrained eye, it looked abandoned. Scanning Sector 1, Madison murmured. She panned the rifle slowly. Her breathing technique was automatic. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. Through the monochrome display, she saw heat, a goat, a pile of burning trash, and then something else. Contact, she said softly. Sector 2, ridgeline above the compound. 2 heat signatures, prone. Evans scrambled to get his spotting scope on the line. I don't see them. They're under thermal blankets. I caught a leak. Someone adjusted a leg. If they have thermal blankets, they're not local militia, Evans noted, tension creeping into his voice. Intel said low-tech insurgents. Intel was wrong. Madison felt the familiar tightening in her gut. It was the intuition that had saved her during the qualification courses when others failed. Something was off. The geometry of the ambush was too perfect. She watched the heat signature again. It wasn't just a sentry, they were setting up a tripod. They have a heavy weapon, Madison said. Looks like a DSHK. If Bravo comes through the pass, they'll be shredded. I need to radio command, Evans said, reaching for the handset. Wait. Madison's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. Look at the valley floor. 300 meters east of the compound. Look at the disturbance pattern. The snow is too flat. Unnatural. IEDs? Daisy-chained, Madison confirmed. This isn't a depot, Evans. It's a kill box. They know we're coming. A sudden burst of static screeched in their earpieces. Sierra 1, this is Bravo lead. We are crossing phase line Alpha. Moving to breach. Madison looked at the distance. Bravo team was walking into a slaughter. The wind howled louder, masking the sound of her own heartbeat thumping in her ears. Evans, tell them to hold, Madison ordered, her voice hard. Command has eyes on the drone feed, Evans argued, though he looked uncertain. They're giving Bravo the green light. If we stop them based on disturbed snow, and we're wrong, if we're right, 12 men die. Davis, you know the protocol. We observe and report. We don't command the element. She looked back through the scope. The heat signature on the ridge moved again. The barrel of the heavy machine gun was traversing, locking onto the exact spot where Bravo team would emerge in 60 seconds. Madison checked her range. Was 200 meters, high angle, erratic crosswind, a difficult shot on a good day. In a blizzard, it was a gamble. I'm not reporting, Madison whispered, flicking the safety off. I'm calculating. Davis, don't do it, Evans warned, realizing what she was preparing. You don't have clearance to fire. You'll be pulled from the teams. Watch the trace, she said, her eye merging with the reticle. She exhaled, emptying her lungs until she was empty. A void in the freezing dark. She wasn't the bullied recruit anymore. She was the judge. Bravo lead, break, she said into the comms, violating radio silence protocols. Ambush, 12 o'clock high. Before command could scream for her to stand down, Madison squeezed the trigger. The round impacted the receiver of the DSHK heavy machine gun a fraction of a second before the gunner could pull the butterfly trigger. The kinetic energy of the .338 Norma Magnum slug shattered the weapon's feed tray and sent the gunner spinning backward into the snow, a spray of hot metal and blood painting the white ridge red. For a moment, the valley was silent. The echo of the shot rolled through the Pamirs like distant thunder, masking the origin point. Cease fire! Cease fire! Who authorized that shot? The voice of the Joint Terminal Attack Controller, JTAC, back at the TOC screamed into Madison's earpiece. Madison ignored the voice. She cycled the bolt of her MK-22, the smooth mechanical action ejecting the spent brass into the snow next to her cheek. She didn't have time for politics. Contact right! Contact right! Bravo lead's voice cut through the chaos on the ground frequency. Taking small arms fire from the eastern ridge. Get to cover. Below, the valley floor erupted. The insurgents, realizing their ambush had been spoiled, opened fire prematurely. Tracers zipped through the darkness like angry hornets. But because Madison had taken out the heavy machine gun, the wall of lead that was supposed to shred Bravo team was now just sporadic rifle fire. Good hit, Evans breathed, his eye glued to his spotting scope. Target neutralized. But you just kicked the hornet's nest, Sierra. I saved their lives, Madison said, her voice devoid of emotion. Scan for secondary positions. That wasn't the only gun. She swept her optic back toward the compound. The thermal image was chaotic now. Figures running, heat blooms from muzzle flashes. But Madison wasn't looking for the shooters. She was looking for the commanders. Sierra 1, this is TOC. The radio crackled again. You are in direct violation of ROE. Stand by for censure. Bravo lead, abort mission, RTB immediately. Negative TOC, Bravo lead replied, breathless, the sound of gunfire heavy in the background. We are pinned. We can't move back. We have to push through to the hard structure. Sierra, give us cover. Madison felt a grim satisfaction. They needed her. The men who had once joked that she was a diversity hire, a PR stunt by the Navy, were now begging for her protection. Copy, Bravo. I have you, Madison said. Evans, I need a wind check. It's shifting. Wind is picking up. 3/4 value from the left. Hold 2 mils right. Madison adjusted her aim. She began to work. It was a rhythmic, deadly dance. Find the heat signature. Calculate the hold. Exhale. Squeeze. One insurgent on a rooftop crumpled. Another, trying to flank the team with an RPG, dropped mid-stride. From her perch, she was the arbiter of life and death, a distant god dispensing judgment with 300-grain bullets. But despite the power, she felt the familiar, cold isolation. She wasn't with them. She was a ghost on a mountain, watching friends bleed in high definition while she lay freezing in the snow. Sierra, we are at the breach point, Bravo lead reported. Pop IR strobes. We're going in. Through her night vision, Madison saw the infrared strobes, buzzsaws, ignite on the helmets of the SEALs below. They pulsed rhythmically, invisible to the naked eye but blindingly bright under NVGs, marking the good guys in the chaos. Wait, Madison whispered to herself. She swung her rifle past the breach point, scanning the roof of the main compound building. Something didn't fit. Amidst the rough stone and sandbags, there was a sleek metallic structure, a chaotic array of antennas rotating silently. Evans, check reference point 4. Is that a jammer? Evans squinted. Looks like a Zetel system, Russian-made, high-powered. If they flip the switch on that, Bravo loses comms. They lose GPS. They lose us. They're powering it up, Evans said, his voice rising an octave. Heat signature on the generator just spiked. Madison didn't wait for permission this time. She shifted her aim to the generator unit powering the electronic warfare suite. It was a small target, partially obscured by a stone parapet. Bravo! Hold breach! EW threat! Hold breach! She fired. The bullet sparked off the stone, missing the generator by inches. The wind had gusted unexpectedly. Miss! Correction! Left point 2, Evans barked. Before she could rack the bolt for a follow-up, the door to the roof flew open. A figure stepped out to check the generator. Madison froze. Through the powerful magnification of the ATEX scope, the image was crystal clear. The man wasn't wearing the loose-fitting shalwar kameez of a local fighter. He was wearing Cry Precision Combat Pants, a plate carrier with a high-cut ballistic helmet and dual-tube night vision goggles flipped up. He moved with the trained fluidity of a Tier 1 operator. He looked up toward the mountain ridge, directly at her position. Even at this distance, the body language was arrogant, challenging. Evans, Madison whispered, the chill in her spine having nothing to do with the snow. That's not a local. I see him, Evans replied, stunned. That gear. Is he Spetsnaz? No, Madison said, focusing on the patch on his shoulder as he turned. It wasn't a flag. It was a private military company logo she recognized from the dark web briefings. He's American, or British. He's a mercenary. The mercenary raised a radio to his lips. Suddenly, a high-pitched squeal erupted in Madison's headset. The active noise cancellation failed to dampen it. It was a digital scream. Sierra, break, Bravo, lost. The static washed out everything. The jammer was active. The mercenary hadn't needed the generator. He had switched to battery backup. Comms are down, Evans yelled over the wind. We lost contact with Bravo and TOC. Madison watched through the scope as the mercenary on the roof smiled, a pixelated grimace in the green phosphor, and pointed a laser designator not at Bravo team, but up at the ridge. At them. He knows we're here, Madison said, racking the bolt, and he's not calling for backup. He's calling for fire. The headset was a graveyard of white noise. The sharp, digital screech of the jamming signal had faded into a dull, rhythmic static that sounded like heavy rain on a tin roof. It was the sound of isolation. Evans, try the SAT-Link, Madison yelled, her voice barely audible over the wind which had picked up to a gale force scream. Dead! Everything is dead! Evans was frantically toggling switches on the comms pack, his face illuminated by the pale green glow of the useless equipment. That jammer is frying the whole spectrum. We can't talk to Bravo. We can't talk to the TOC. Madison slammed her eye back to the scope. Down in the valley, the war was playing out like a silent movie. She watched Bravo teams stack up on the north side of the main compound building. They were moving with perfect, fluid aggression. The point man, a massive operator named Miller, who had once told Madison she belonged in the kitchen, raised his suppressed HK-416. He checked the corner. He flashed a hand signal. Squeeze. They were going to breach. They don't know, Madison whispered, her stomach dropping. They think the silence is clear air. They think we're covering them. But there was no cover. The mercenary on the roof had disappeared, likely to coordinate the kill box inside. The building wasn't a stronghold. It was a claymore mine waiting for a tripwire. If Miller kicked that door, the explosives wired to the frame, or the heavy machine gun waiting behind the drywall, would erase the entire stack. "Evans, pop a flare, do something." "I can't. If I pop a flare, I expose our position to every RPG in the valley," Evans argued, his logic sound but agonizing. "If they breach, they die." Madison watched Miller's boot tense. He was seconds away from the kick. She had no way to speak to him. No radio, no laser. The mercenary would see the beam source. She had only one tool left, the MK-22 ASR. She shifted her aim. The crosshairs settled on Miller's chest. For a terrifying millisecond, muscle memory tried to take over. Center mass, exhale, squeeze. She forced her hands to tremble, forced the reticle to drift. She moved the crosshair 6 inches to the right, to the stone doorframe, right at head level. If she missed left, she would put a 338 round through the skull of her own teammate. If she missed right, the bullet would fly harmlessly into the dark, and Miller would kick the door and die anyway. "What are you doing?" Evans hissed, seeing her barrel angle. "Davis, check fire. Friendly in the scope." "Forgive me," Madison whispered. She didn't exhale. She didn't pause. She snatched the trigger. Crack. The rifle bucked violently. Down in the valley, a chunk of stone the size of a fist exploded from the doorframe, inches from Miller's face. The impact threw concrete dust and sparks across his night vision goggles. The reaction was instantaneous. Miller flinched, throwing himself backward, tackling the man behind him. The entire stack collapsed in a heap of tangled limbs and gear, rolling away from the door. 1 second later, the door exploded from the inside out. A predetermined demolition charge detonated, blowing the heavy wooden door off its hinges and sending a tongue of fire into the space where Miller had been standing just a heartbeat before. Hundreds of rounds of machine gun fire poured out of the smoking aperture, shredding the air where the team would have been. "Jesus Christ," Evans breathed, watching the carnage through his spotter scope. You stopped them." Madison didn't celebrate. She cycled the bolt, her hands shaking uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was dumping. She had almost killed him, but she had been right. Bravo team was scrambling for hard cover, dragging each other behind a low stone wall. They were alive. Confused, battered, but alive. But Madison had made a fatal trade. By firing that shot, she had saved the team, but she had signed a death warrant for herself and Evans. The muzzle flash of a .338 in the pitch black of the mountains was a beacon. The acoustic crack was a roadmap. The mercenary knew exactly where they were. "Displace!" Madison screamed, grabbing her rifle by the barrel. "Evans, move! Now!" "Where?" "We're on a ridge." "Anywhere but here." They hadn't moved 10 feet when the first mortar round hit. It wasn't a direct hit, but the concussion waves slammed into Madison like a physical blow, lifting her off the snow and throwing her into the shale. The sound was deafening, a crump that vibrated in her teeth. Then came the whistle of the second round. "Incoming!" The snow around them erupted. Rock shards turned into shrapnel. Madison curled into a ball, protecting her head, feeling the heat of the explosion wash over her thermal suit. They weren't shooting at Bravo anymore. Every gun in the valley, directed by the unseen mercenary, was now elevating its aim. They were bracketing the ridge. "I'm hit!" Evans screamed through the ringing in her ears. Madison looked over. Evans was lying on his back, clutching his thigh. Dark blood was already pooling on the white snow, steaming in the freezing air. The third whistle started, louder this time. Closer. The world was ringing. A high-pitched, piercing sine wave that drowned out the wind. Madison shook her head, dislodging a pile of shale that had buried her legs. She wasn't dead. She checked her hands. They were still attached. She checked her rifle. The M22 was covered in dust, but the action seemed clear. "Evans!" She screamed, but she couldn't hear her own voice. She crawled through the churned-up snow toward the dark shape of her spotter. The mortar round had landed less than 15 meters away. Close enough to kill, far enough that the terrain had absorbed the worst of the blast wave. Evans was conscious, but his eyes were wide, dilated with shock. He was clutching his right thigh. The white snow around him was turning a horrifying, steaming crimson. Madison moved on instinct. Training kicked in, overriding the panic. She ripped the IFAC individual first aid kit from her belt, her gloved fingers fumbling with the Velcro in the freezing cold. "Let go, Evans," she yelled, slapping his hands away from the wound. A piece of jagged rock, superheated by the explosion, had punched through the side of his quad. It had missed the femoral artery by millimeters, but the bleeding was profuse. I can't feel my foot," Evans gasped, his teeth chattering violently. "You're fine," she lied. She pulled the cat tourniquet, looped it high and tight on his thigh, and cranked the windlass. 1 turn, 2 turns. Evans screamed, a sound that cut through the ringing in her ears. She locked it in place. Whump! Another mortar launch from the valley. "Move! We have to move!" Madison grabbed Evans by the drag handle on the back of his plate carrier. "Leave me," Evans sputtered, his face gray. "Get the rifle. Provide cover for Bravo. That's the mission." "Shut up, Lieutenant." Madison dug her boots into the loose shale. This was the moment. This was the specific nightmare every instructor had promised her during Bud S. When a 220-pound operator goes down, Davis, are you going to be able to haul him out? Or are you going to let him die because you didn't do enough squats? She gritted her teeth, feeling the veins in her neck bulge. Evans was heavy, dead weight with his gear, ammo, and the lethargy of shock. She was 5'7", 135 pounds of corded muscle. Physics was against her. She didn't care about physics. She heaved backward, her quads burning. Evans slid a foot, then another. Crash! The next mortar round hit the ledge they had just vacated. The shock wave shoved Madison forward, slamming her chest into the rocks. But she didn't let go of the drag handle. "Command!" she panted into the dead radio, hoping anyone could hear. "Sierra 1 displacing. Sierra 2 is casualty. Urgent surgical." Static was her only answer. The enemy gunners were walking the fire up the ridgeline. They were bracketing, narrowing down the coordinates. The snow was no longer white. It was a slurry of mud, ice, and soot. "Davis, drop me," Evans groaned. "You're too slow." "I am not too slow," she hissed, every word a struggle against the altitude and the weight. She dragged him toward a rock outcropping 20 meters away that looked stable enough to offer cover from the indirect fire. Her lungs burned as if she were inhaling glass. The cold air bit into her throat. She remembered the faces of the men in her boat crew years ago. The eye rolls when she took her turn under the log. The whispers that she was being graded on a curve. She pulled harder. She wasn't leaving him. She would drag him all the way to base if she had to. They reached the lip of the outcropping. Madison collapsed for a second, gasping, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She checked Evans again. The bleeding had slowed, but he was fading. Hypothermia was setting in faster because of the blood loss. "Stay with me," she said, slapping his cheek lightly. The mercenary's heavy machine gun started up again below, raking the ridgeline. Bullets snapped overhead, chipping away at the rock that sheltered them. They were pinned. No comms, no support, and the mortars were still falling. Madison looked at her rifle. She needed to return fire. She needed to make them keep their heads down. She propped the M22 on a flat rock, trying to find a stable firing position. She adjusted the scope, but her hands were shaking from the physical exertion of the carry. "Steady," she whispered to herself. Crump. This one wasn't a near miss. The mortar round impacted the shelf of ice and rock directly above them. The explosion didn't hit them, but the structural integrity of the mountain gave way. The ground beneath Madison simply ceased to exist. "Grab him!" she screamed, lunging for Evans. She caught his strap, but the shelf tilted violently. The world spun. Snow, rock, and equipment tumbled into the void. Madison slid. She clawed at the ice, her fingernails tearing, but there was no purchase. She fell, sliding down a steep, 60-degree chute of ice hidden beneath the snow. She hit a ledge hard, the air driven from her lungs. For a moment, there was blackness. When she opened her eyes, she was wedged into a crevasse, 20 feet below where she had been. Evans was groaning somewhere above her, caught on a snag of rock. She reached for her chest. Her pistol was there. Her knife was there. But her hands were empty. She looked down into the dark abyss of the crevasse. 10 feet below her, caught on a precarious finger of ice, was the MK-22, her primary weapon, her only way to reach out and touch the enemy. And above them, on the ridgeline she had just fallen from, she heard the crunch of boots on snow. The enemy patrol hadn't just fired mortars, they had sent a team up to verify the kill. Madison pressed her back against the wall of the crevasse. The ice sucked the heat straight through her layers, a parasitic cold that sought to numb her muscles right when she needed them most. Above her, the crunch of boots on the shale was deafeningly loud. Da, viju krov. Yes, I see blood. The voice was guttural, speaking Russian. A beam of white light sliced down into the fissure, dancing over the rocks where Evans was wedged 10 feet above her. He was unconscious, his head lolling against a jagged spur of rock, the tourniquet on his leg a stark black band against the mess of red and white. Madison held her breath. The beam swept past Evans, down toward her. She squeezed into the shadow of an overhang, making herself small. The light lingered on the ledge below her. There, resting precariously on a lip of ice, was her MK-22 rifle. It was 10 feet down. If she moved to get it, she would be seen. If she stayed, they would find Evans, kill him, and then toss a grenade down to finish her. She looked at her hands. She had her sidearm, a SIG P226, but a gunshot would alert the entire valley. The silencer was on her rifle. She reached for the sheath on her vest and drew her fixed-blade knife, 4 inches of serrated steel. Spuskaius, going down. Ropes were thrown over the edge. They were coming down to verify the kill. Madison analyzed the geometry of the trap. 2 men, 1 rope. The first man would be vulnerable for the few seconds he was suspended. The second would be covering from the top. She unclipped a flashbang grenade from her belt. She didn't pull the pin yet. She waited. The first pair of boots appeared over the edge, crampons biting into the ice. The mercenary was descending slowly, scanning with a headlamp. Madison closed her eyes to preserve her night vision. She listened. The scrape of metal on ice. The heavy breathing of a man exerting himself at altitude. Scrape, scrape. Pause. He was level with Evans now. "American!" the Russian shouted up to his partner. "He is alive!" The mercenary unholstered his pistol to finish Evans off. Madison pulled the pin on the flashbang, cooked it for 1 second, and tossed it not down, but up, banking it off the opposite wall of the crevasse, so it bounced directly toward the lip where the second man was covering. Bang! The explosion in the confined space was thunderous. The blinding light reflected off the ice, turning the crevasse into a strobe-lit white room. The man on top screamed, blinded. The man on the rope flinched, looking up in panic. Madison moved. She didn't climb. She launched herself from the ledge, jumping across the gap to the rope. She caught the line with one hand, swinging her body weight into the mercenary. Her boots slammed into his chest, knocking the wind out of him. Before he could raise his pistol, Madison drove the knife into the soft gap between his helmet and his plate carrier. She felt the resistance of fabric, then the sickening give of flesh. She twisted the blade. The man went limp instantly, his weapon clattering into the abyss. Madison didn't hesitate. She used the dead man's body as an anchor, riding the rope down past him, landing cat-like on the lower ledge next to her rifle. She grabbed the M22. Above, the second man was recovering, firing blind bursts into the hole. Bullets chipped the ice around her face, stinging her skin with shards. Madison slung the rifle, grabbed the rope, and began to climb up, hand over hand, fueled by a primal rage. She wasn't a sniper anymore. She was a predator. She vaulted over the lip of the crevasse. The second mercenary was on his knees, rubbing his eyes, his rifle sweeping wildly. Madison didn't shoot him. She stepped in close, grabbed the barrel of his rifle to deflect it, and drove the buttstock of her MK-22 into his face. He collapsed backward. Silence returned to the ridge. Madison stood over the bodies, her chest heaving. The wind stripped the heat from the fresh blood on her gloves. She looked down into the crevasse. "Evans!" she hissed. No movement. She rappelled back down to him. His skin was pale, waxy. The hypothermia was winning. She checked his pulse. Weak, thready. "Stay with me, Lieutenant," she whispered, checking the tourniquet. It was holding, but the cold was coagulating the blood in his veins. She grabbed his radio. The fall might have reset the internal encryption key, or maybe the angle of the crevasse shielded them from the jammer's direct line of sight. "Toke, this is Sierra 1. Do you read?" She waited, static. Then a voice cut through, faint but audible. "Era 1. Read you. Status? Sierra 1. Sierra 2 is critical. Urgent medevac required. We are compromised. Requesting immediate extraction at secondary LZ." There was a pause. A long, agonizing silence where Madison just listened to Evans's shallow breathing. Then the voice returned. It wasn't the panicked radio operator from before. It was the commander. His voice was cold, detached, filtered through thousands of miles of satellite feed. "Negative, Sierra 1. The airspace is denied. The valley is too hot. We cannot risk a bird." "He's dying, sir." Madison snapped, her professionalism cracking. "If we don't move him now, he's gone." "Listen closely, Davis," the commander said. "The mission has priority. We have lost contact with Bravo. We believe they are captured. You are the only asset left in the field with eyes on target." Madison looked at Evans. He looked like a broken doll. "Your orders are to proceed to Overwatch Point Zulu, re-establish visual on the compound, confirm the location of the nuclear material." "I can't move him alone to Point Zulu. It's a vertical climb." "Then you leave him, Sierra 1. The order hung in the freezing air like a physical weight. "Secure your gear, leave the casualty, complete the mission." "That is a direct order." "Do you copy?" Madison lowered the radio. She looked at Evans' face. He was the one who had vouched for her when the team wanted her gone. He was the one who spotted for her when she broke the range records. She looked at the rope. She looked at the mountain. "Sierra 1, do you copy?" Madison keyed the mic. Her thumb was numb. "Copy," she lied. The wind had shifted. It was no longer a gale, but a steady freezing draft that carried the distinct sound of sporadic gunfire from the valley floor. Madison was moving, but barely. She had lashed Evans's drag handle to her own harness using a carabiner, turning herself into a pack mule. Every step up the shale slope was a battle against physics. Her crampons bit into the ice, slipping, catching, then slipping again. Her quads screamed with lactic acid burn. "Sierra 1, telemetry indicates you are still at the extraction site," the commander's voice barked in her earpiece, the signal clearer now that she was out of the crevasse. "Confirm you have separated from the casualty." Madison didn't answer. She grit her teeth, leaned forward at a 45-degree angle, and drove her legs. Evans was a dead weight behind her, sliding over the snow with a wet, heavy sound. "Sierra 1, respond. Did you dump the casualty?" "Negative," Madison gasped, the word tearing out of her raw throat. "You are in violation of a direct order, petty officer. You are compromising the operation. If you cannot proceed to the objective, you are ordered to RTB immediately. Leave the casualty and move to the emergency extract. Do you copy? Return to base. Run away. Save the expensive asset, the sniper, and leave the liability to bleed out in the snow." It was the logical, cold calculus of war. It was exactly what they expected of her. If she left him, the board would say she was a cold professional. If she stayed and failed, they would say she was too emotional, too attached, too female for the job. "Women don't have the killer instinct," an instructor had once told her. "They nurture when they should terminate." Madison reached the crest of the ridge. Below her, the valley opened up like a dark amphitheater. She could see the flashes of gunfire. Bravo team was trapped behind a low stone wall near the compound gate, suppressed by fire from three sides. She unclipped Evans and checked him. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow but alive. She packed snow around his frame to insulate him and conceal his thermal signature. "Sierra 1, acknowledge. Abort mission. RTB now." Madison looked down at the tactical display on her wrist. Bravo team was flashing red. They were taking casualties. If she ran now, she would survive. She would face a court-martial, maybe, but she would be alive. But Miller, the point man, and the rest of the team would be dead within 10 minutes. She wasn't driven by emotion. She was driven by the tactical reality that command couldn't see from their satellite feed. She was the only piece on the board that could change the outcome. "I have eyes on Bravo," Madison said, her voice steady. "They are pinned by a crossfire. I have the angle." Negative. You are compromised. You do not have authorization to engage. Pull back. Madison reached up to her chest rig. She found the master volume knob on her radio control unit. She didn't just turn it down. She reached for the transmit cable connecting the PTT, push to talk, to the headset and yanked it out. The voice of the commander cut off instantly. Silence rushed back in, heavy and pure. She was alone now, truly alone. No orders, no backup, no extraction. Madison deployed the bipod of her Mk-22 on a flat rock. She settled into the prone position behind the rifle. The cold snow seeped through her pants, but she pushed the sensation away. She built her position, shoulders square, cheek weld firm, eye relief perfect. She peered through the scope. Bravo team was in a desperate state. She saw Miller firing blindly over the wall. She saw another SEAL dragging a wounded man deeper into cover. Then she saw what was about to kill them. To the east, on a rocky spur overlooking Bravo's position, a team of insurgents was setting up a PKM machine gun. They were moving efficiently, undisturbed. They had a flanking angle. Once that gun opened up, it would bypass Bravo's cover entirely. It would be a turkey shoot. Range, Madison whispered to herself. She laced the target. The number flashed in red on her display. 1,640 meters. 1 mile. It was extreme range for the conditions. The wind was howling cross canyon. Her rifle was cold bored. Her hands were trembling from the exertion of dragging Evans. If she missed, the PKM crew would spot her flash and turn the gun on her. Or worse, they would ignore her and finish Bravo. She dialed the elevation turret. Click, click, click. It felt like ticking down the seconds of a bomb. She checked the wind again. Mirages were dancing in the thermal view, making the air look like fluid. "I'm not leaving you, boys," she whispered. She wasn't the emotional liability. She was the guardian angel, and she was about to rain hell. The distance was not just a number, it was a physical barrier. 1,640 meters. A mile. At this range, the bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach the target. In those 3 seconds, gravity would drag it down, wind would push it sideways, the rotation of the earth would shift the ground beneath it, and the spin of the bullet itself would cause it to drift right. Madison stared through the ATACR scope. The magnification was dialed to 25x. The image was grainy with digital noise from the low-light enhancement, but the target was clear enough. The PKM gunner was prone, his weapon traversing toward the unsuspecting Bravo team. She shivered. It was a violent, spasmodic jerk that shook her entire frame. The crosshair jumped 10 feet off target. "Stop!" she hissed through chattering teeth. She was freezing to death. Her core temperature had dropped to a critical level. The body's natural response was to shake to generate heat, but for a sniper, that survival mechanism was a liability. She needed to be a statue. She closed her eyes. She visualized a furnace in her chest. She focused on the anger, the burning, cold rage at the command that abandoned them, at the enemy hunting them. Control. She forced her muscles to lock. The shivering subsided for a fleeting second. She opened her eyes. The reticle settled. Now the math. Range 1640. Temp 25 Celsius. Altitude 11,000 feet. The cold air was dense, creating more drag, but the high altitude meant thinner air, creating less. The two variables fought each other in the ballistic calculator of her mind. She dialed the elevation turret. 21.5 mils up. Wind. Full value left to right. Spin drift. Right. The wind and the spin were working together to push the bullet off course. She had to hold left. Way left. She bracketed the target in the Christmas tree grid of the Horus Trimmer 3 reticle, holding into empty space, aiming at a patch of snow well away from the man she intended to kill. Coriolis. She was firing east. The target was dropping away from her as the earth rotated. It was negligible at close range, but at a mile it mattered. She added a click of elevation. She checked the scope level. The bubble was centered. The PKM gunner racked his bolt. He was seconds away from firing. Madison exhaled. She pushed all the air out of her lungs until they were flat. This was the respiratory pause, the moment between breaths where the body was most still. Her heart rate was the only movement left. Thump, thump, thump. She applied pressure to the trigger. 2 pounds, then 3. She squeezed between the heartbeats. Crack. The MiG-22 roared, the muzzle brake venting gas sideways, kicking up a cloud of snow around her. The recoil slammed into her bruised shoulder, but she didn't blink. She kept her eye glued to the scope to trace the shot. 1. The bullet was supersonic, tearing through the dark. 2. It transitioned to subsonic, destabilizing slightly as it broke the sound barrier's drag. 3. In the scope, the PKM gunner's head snapped back violently. A mist of pink vaporized in the green phosphor view. The man slumped over his weapon, dead before he heard the sound of the shot that killed him. "Target down," Madison whispered to the empty air. Down in the valley, Bravo team realized the threat had been neutralized. They began to return fire with renewed intensity, pushing toward the compound. But Madison didn't have time to celebrate the perfect shot. As she cycled the bolt to chamber a fresh round, her peripheral vision caught a flash from the main compound roof. She swung the scope back to the mercenary's position. He was there, the Western operator. He wasn't looking at Bravo team. He was looking through a high-powered spotter scope, staring directly at the ridgeline. Directly at the plume of snow her muzzle blast had just kicked up. He lowered the scope. He picked up a radio. He didn't need to guess anymore. He had her exact azimuth. Madison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The mile shot was a miracle of ballistics, but it was also a flare gun. She had just announced her position to the most dangerous man on the battlefield, and he wasn't going to send mortars this time. He was going to send something much faster. Madison jammed the transmit cable back into her PTT box with a trembling hand. The silence in her headset was replaced instantly by the chaotic chatter of the tactical network. "Taking heavy fire. We are combat ineffective. Where is that air support?" Bravo lead's voice was ragged, bordering on desperation. Madison looked at the sky. Above the cloud layer, she heard the faint, high-pitched whine of jet engines. The cavalry had arrived, but they were circling like sharks, unable to bite. "Talk. This is Sierra 1, Madison said, her voice cutting through the panic. "I have visual on the target, requesting immediate chaos on grid 34 Tango Bravo." A new voice entered the net. The pilot. Call sign, Viper 2-1. "Sierra 1, Viper. I see the IR strobes, but I have multiple heat signatures mixed in with friendlies. You are danger close. I cannot drop. Repeat. Unable to drop." Madison cursed. The mercenary had ordered his men to close the distance, hugging Bravo team's position so tightly that any bomb dropped on the enemy would kill the SEALs too. It was a classic, brutal tactic. "Viper, if you don't drop, they die anyway," Madison argued, watching through her scope as insurgents moved to flank Miller's position. "I need separation, Sierra. Get them to back off, or I can't clear it hot." Madison looked at her rifle. She had 3 rounds left in the magazine. She couldn't kill them all. She needed to make them move. She needed to make them turn away from Bravo. She looked at the mercenary on the roof. He was still watching her ridge, coordinating the flank. "Evans?" she whispered to the unconscious man beside her. "I'm sorry." She grabbed the PEQ-15 laser module on her rifle rail and twisted the dial from IR, infrared, to VIS, visible. In modern warfare, a visible laser was a death sentence. It was a bright green line pointing directly back to the shooter, but it was also the loudest way to say, "I am here." "Viper, stand by for separation," Madison radioed. She stood up. She didn't crouch. She didn't seek cover. She stood up on the ridgeline, silhouetted against the night sky, a lone figure in the howling wind. She activated the laser. A brilliant green beam sliced through the darkness, painting the chest of the lead insurgent flanking Bravo team. "Hey!" she screamed, though they couldn't hear her. She fired. The insurgent dropped. The effect was instantaneous. The green beam originating from the high ground drew every eye in the valley. The insurgents, terrified of the sniper who had been picking them off, instinctively turned their weapons away from Bravo and toward the ridge. The mercenary on the roof shouted orders, pointing at Madison. Suppressive fire shifted. Hundreds of rounds snapped through the air around her. Rock shards exploded into her face. A bullet grazed her ribs, tearing through the thermal suit, searing her skin like a hot poker. Madison didn't flinch. She kept the laser steady, painting the cluster of enemy fighters who had moved away from Bravo to engage her. "Viper, do you see the separation?" She gritted out, blood trickling down her forehead. "Visual confirmed. Separation established. Bad guys are looking at you. Good guys are heads down." "Cleared hot," Madison screamed. "Drop it. Drop it on my laser." "Copy, Sierra. Cleared hot. Time on target, 5 seconds." Madison dropped the rifle and dove on top of Evans, covering his body with hers. The sky tore open. 2 GBU-12 laser-guided bombs shrieked down from the heavens. The impact was earth-shattering. A twin bloom of orange fire erupted on the valley floor, vaporizing the flanking force and the heavy machine gun nest. The shockwave rolled up the mountain, slamming into Madison, compressing her chest against the stone. Debris rained down for what felt like forever. When the noise subsided, the radio crackled. "Good hits! Good effects on target!" Viper reported, his voice shaking slightly. "Sierra 1? That was crazy." Madison gasped for air, rolling off Evans. She checked the valley. Bravo team was moving now, pushing into the compound under the cover of the smoke. They were safe. She had won. She reached for her rifle to scan for the mercenary. Whoosh! The sound was distinct. It wasn't a bullet. It was the sound of a rocket motor igniting. Madison looked up just in time to see the smoke trail spiraling toward her. The mercenary hadn't been hit by the airstrike. He had waited for her to expose herself. She didn't have time to move. She only had time to turn her back to the impact. The RPG warhead didn't hit her directly. It hit the rock shelf 3 feet below her position. The explosion disintegrated the ground. Madison felt a sensation of weightlessness, then a crushing impact as the world turned upside down. She was falling, tumbling into the darkness along with tons of rock and ice. Then nothing. Pain was a color. It was white, blinding, searing white. Madison gasped, inhaling a mouthful of snow. Her body convulsed, sending a spike of agony through her left side that felt like a serrated knife being twisted between her ribs. She opened her eyes. The world was tilted sideways. She was lying at the bottom of a scree slope, half buried in an avalanche of loose rock and ice. The fall had been 50 feet, maybe more. The snow had cushioned the impact, but the rocks had done the damage. "Evans," she croaked. She pushed herself up. Her left arm wouldn't support her weight. Broken. Definitely broken. She rolled onto her right side, spitting out blood that tasted like copper and ash. 10 meters away, a dark shape lay motionless in the snow. Evans. He was still strapped to the drag harness she had clipped to her vest, but the carabiner had snapped during the tumble. Madison crawled. It wasn't a tactical movement. It was a desperate clawing. Every inch was a negotiation with consciousness. She reached him. He was blue. His lips were cracked, his eyes closed. But there was a pulse. Faint, fluttering, but there. "Wake up, sir," she whispered, slapping his face with her good hand. "Ride's coming." She reached for her radio. The headset was gone, ripped away in the fall. She found the PTT box on her chest, dangling by a wire. The speaker mic was cracked. She pressed the button. "Sierra 1. She didn't know if she was transmitting. "Grid. Marked." Static. Then a sound. Not on the radio, but in the air. A low, thumping vibration that she felt in her broken ribs before she heard it. Thud, 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 thud. A Chinook. MH-47G. The heavy lifter. The angel of mercy. But it wasn't coming for her. It was heading for the valley floor to pick up Bravo team. Madison fumbled for her strobe light. Her fingers were stiff, unresponsive claws. She forced her thumb against the switch. Click. The IR strobe began to pulse, an invisible beacon in the night. "Negative visual on Sierra element." The pilot's voice drifted from the speaker mic on her chest, faint and tinny. "We are at capacity. Fuel is critical. We are dusting off with Bravo." Tears of frustration welled in Madison's eyes, freezing instantly on her lashes. They were leaving, after everything. Then a different voice cut through the static. It was deep, angry, and familiar. "Belay that order, pilot. We are not leaving." It was Miller, the point man, the man who had mocked her size during selection, the man whose life she had saved with the warning shot. Sierra 1 is unaccounted for, Miller roared. You put this bird on the deck, or I will put a bullet in the console. No one leaves until we have her. Madison let out a sob that racked her broken body. I see a strobe, the co-pilot shouted. High ground, 400 meters north of the LZ, base of the cliff. That's her, Miller said, his voice dropping to a growl. Go get her! The sound of the rotors changed pitch. The massive shadow of the helicopter shifted, rising from the valley floor and banking toward the cliff face. The downwash hit Madison like a hurricane, whipping the snow into a blinding vortex. She shielded Evans's face with her body. The Chinook couldn't land here. The slope was too steep. It hovered overhead, a dark leviathan blotting out the stars. The side door slid open. A jungle penetrator hoist began to lower. A figure descended on the cable. A PJ, pararescue jumper. He hit the snow next to her, unhooking immediately. He didn't ask if she was okay. He saw the blood. He saw the angle of her arm. I've got the casualty, the PJ yelled into his helmet, moving to Evans first, clipping him into the hoist. Sending one up. Evans disappeared into the swirling snow above. The cable came back down. The PJ grabbed Madison. He looked at her face, seeing the sheer exhaustion, the concussion in her eyes. Can you hold on? He screamed over the rotor wash. Madison nodded. She didn't have the strength to speak. She wrapped her good arm around the penetrator seat as he buckled her in. Going up! Her feet left the ground. The vibration of the cable traveled through her spine. She rose into the air, spinning slowly. Below her, the battlefield shrank. She saw the smoking ruin of the compound. She saw the bodies of the men she had killed. She saw the blood-soaked snow where she had lain. And she saw the spot where her Mech-22 rifle lay buried forever under the ice. She was leaving a piece of her soul on that mountain. The girl who wanted to prove herself was dead, buried in the avalanche. The woman rising into the fuselage was something else entirely. Strong arms grabbed her vest and hauled her onto the metal deck of the helicopter. The ramp was crowded with Bravo team. They were battered, bandaged, dirty. Miller was there. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He looked at her. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He stepped forward, grabbed her good hand, and squeezed it. Clear, Miller said to the crew chief. We're all home. Madison leaned her head back against the vibrating wall of the helicopter. As the bird banked hard and accelerated away from the nightmare, she closed her eyes. She didn't ring the bell. The room smelled of floor wax and old paper. It was a stark contrast to the ozone and blood of the Pamir Mountains, but in some ways it was more suffocating. Madison sat in the hard wooden chair, her left arm in a sling. Her ribs wrapped tightly beneath her dress, blue uniform. Across the mahogany desk sat Rear Admiral Vance. On the desk lay a thick manila folder stamped classified, eyes only. You disobeyed a direct order from command, Petty Officer Davis, Vance said, his voice level, unreadable. He didn't look at her. He was flipping through the pages of the after-action report. Yes, sir, Madison replied. She didn't offer an excuse. She didn't stutter. You severed your communications uplink. You engaged targets without authorization. You endangered yourself and your spotter after being ordered to extract. Vance finally looked up. His eyes were like flint. In the regular Navy, that buys you a court-martial and a dishonorable discharge. It ends your career. Madison stared at a point on the wall behind him. I saved the team, sir. And we secured the nuclear components. Results do not excuse process, Davis. That is the lesson we teach at BUD-S. If everyone decides they know better than the TIAC, we don't have a military. We have a mob. The silence stretched. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, mimicking the countdown of a bomb. This was it. The bell. They were going to ring it for her. Vance closed the folder. He rested his hand on it. However, Vance continued, his tone shifting slightly, the intelligence we recovered from that compound has dismantled a dirty bomb network spanning 3 continents. Bravo team is alive because you cleared that ridge. Miller specifically has submitted a statement. Madison's breath hitched. Miller. The man who had led the campaign to wash her out during training. He says that without Sierra 1's initiative, Bravo would have been KIA within minutes of the breach. Vance slid the folder across the desk toward her. This is the disciplinary file regarding the incident on the ridge. Madison looked at it. She reached out with her good hand. "Open it," Vance ordered. She flipped the cover open. The folder was empty. She looked up, confused. "There was no radio failure," Vance said, leaning back in his chair. "But there is also no record of you receiving the RTB order. It seems the atmospheric interference was severe." A ghost of a smile touched the Admiral's lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth. It was the grim acknowledgement of the gray zone where special operators lived. "Get your arm fixed, Davis. Your team is waiting." 2 or 3 months later, the team room was dimly lit, smelling of stale beer and gun oil. It was a sanctuary, a place where the mask came off. Madison walked in. She was walking without the cane now, though her gait was still stiff. The chatter in the room died down instantly. She moved toward the bar. She felt the eyes on her, not the predatory stares of recruitment, waiting for her to fail. These were different. They were measuring her. Miller was standing by the tap. He looked older, tired. The scar on his forehead from the door breach was a jagged pink line. He didn't say a word. He reached into the cooler, pulled out a cold beer, and cracked the tab. He slid it down the wooden bar top. It stopped perfectly in front of her hand. Madison picked it up. She looked around the room. Evans was there, still in a wheelchair, raising his glass. The rest of Bravo team nodded. There was no applause. There were no speeches about breaking glass ceilings or being a hero. There was just the silence, the heavy, respectful silence of men who knew she had walked through the fire and come out the other side. She wasn't the female operator anymore. She was just Sierra. She took a sip. It was the best beer she had ever tasted. When the morning mist clung to the grass at the Naval Special Warfare Center, the air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of salt water and gunpowder. Madison lay in the prone position on the sniper deck. The M22 was pressed into her shoulder, a new rifle, painted with the same wear patterns as the old one. "Range is 800 yards, she said quietly. To her left, a young recruit lay behind a spotting scope. She was small, wiry, with eyes that held the same terrified determination Madison once had. The girl was shaking slightly from the cold, or maybe the nerves. I can't find the trace, instructor," the recruit stammered. "The wind is too tricky." Madison pulled her eye away from the scope. She looked at the girl. She remembered the yelling, the insults, the way they had tried to break her by telling her she didn't belong. "Take a breath," Madison said softly. "The wind isn't your enemy. It's just information. Listen to it." The recruit looked at her, surprised by the lack of aggression. "But what if I miss?" "Then you adjust," Madison said, "and you send it again. We don't fail unless we quit, and we don't quit." Madison looked downrange. She saw the steel target shimmering in the distance. She didn't see a target. She saw the journey, the pain, the blood in the snow, the silence of the file. "Watch the trace," Madison commanded. She exhaled. The world narrowed down to a single point. Crack. The steel gong rang out, a clear bell-like tone that echoed across the water. It was the only bell she would ever ring.